Hello, hello, what's up everybody? John the Morgile here, checking in for a Flat Earth video for you. Hope you enjoy it. As many of you guys know, my wife had a heart attack earlier this month, so she had collapsed coming out of the bathroom, and I didn't know what was going on, so I called for an ambulance and gave her CPR until they arrived. And yeah, it turned out she had a coronary, and it was very close. So I've been under a bit of PTSD for the last few weeks. But I'm thankful to God that everything worked out okay, and she is doing better. Although, yeah, not a nice experience. They're wanting to give her a pacemaker, but without any insurance. That's like way out of our league. So it's been sort of a rough month, and I just wanted to send out a big thank you to everybody that supported and helped out. God bless you guys. Thanks so much to the everybody that chipped in on PayPal, and of course everybody on Patreon. I love you guys. I couldn't do any of this without you, so just wanted to let you know how much I appreciate you. Throughout history, two categories of science, theoretical and practical, have progressed independently of one another to the point where the former is barely recognizable as science. Now, while advancing practical technologies, it's critical to challenge current accepted norms, else progress be halted in the name of preserving the status quo. So, for example, the scientific community concurred at some point in the past that people would never achieve manned or piloted flight, right up until the point where the Wright brothers did the impossible and developed an airplane capable of sustained flight in the early 1900s. Now, had aviation pioneers simply submitted to the dogmas of the scientific consensus of the day, the attempt would simply never have been made, and the world would be a very different place. A modern person couldn't possibly imagine the state of the world today had aviation never been achieved. And it goes without saying that submitting to theoretical dogma or the consensus of learned men is antithetical to the spirit of science, yet the modern world is filled with degree-holding so-called experts who agree on well, one thing in particular unanimously, and that is, of course, the twirling, rotund planet Earth in the vacuum of infinite space, of course. Now, anyone who questions or disagrees with this consensus must be uneducated or mad or a fool. When we adhere to theoretical scientific consensus without question and fail to challenge accepted theories, it will ultimately be a hindrance to progress and a bulwark to a stagnant set of rigid beliefs in scientism. Such an intellectual quagmire is indeed antithetical to the spirit of science, yet is celebrated as infallible science with a capital S in this modern era of lunacy. Such enshrinement and worship of theory is precisely anti-science, yet it is the cornerstone of the modern Western paradigm, especially in terms of this globe Earth theory, and by extension the theoretical infinite universe according to astrophysics. Now, if scientism, or maybe we can call it anti-science, was a psychological barrier for inventors like the Wright brothers in the context of aviation, then what sort of sociological effect does scientism have upon the individual in the broadest context, when the foundation of our worldview is built upon a litany of fallacious assumptions which have been carved in stone in the scientific dogma as concrete, unquestionable axioms. How many potential inventions or technologies could exist if only the brilliant minds of the world begin to operate in a social structure built upon love, truth, and respect for each individual's sovereign right to flourish? How many free energy technologies, for example, have been refused patents in order to preserve the world's addiction to oil or the value of the petrodollar? How many cures for cancer have been swept under the rug, their developers hounded and jailed oftentimes by the authorities in order to preserve the lucrative cancer industry? The world we find ourselves in would be a very different place if it were run by honest, loving human beings. And I submit that the primary cause for the state of the modern world is the belief that the universe is an infinite void, and the world we call home is an insignificant speck of dust in the grand scheme of things. While it is necessary to humor assumptions or hypotheses for argument's sake, when such theories become unquestionable laws, then the subject at hand ceases to be science, secretly donning the garbs of a religion. Theoretical anti-science hides behind the practical uses of applied science. Advances in technology over the last century or so are a testament to the value and necessity of practical applied science. Although nothing akin to physical applied science, theoretical anti-science gets a sort of psychological free pass, for it rides on the coattails, or at least shares the name, of science. So again, we have practical applied science and theoretical anti-science. Now, a long series of assumptions granted for argument's sake have incrementally become rigid doctrines of scientism and eventually outright lies, all cloaked by the title of science. While we need not prove a motive for these misunderstandings, mistakes, and yes, lies, which form the basis of the modern anti-science paradigm, it's critical to understand the origins of this hypothetical narrative turned ironclad belief system. Since we know for certain the world could not be a spinning ball lost in the infinite theory of space, there certainly exists a deception. There must. Now, this grand deception must certainly have some origin, of course, and some driving force behind it to keep it going, although it is not necessary for us to prove who done it or why in order for the deception to actually exist. Some may argue it is the devil himself who is ultimately responsible for the globe Earth Great Deception, which very well may be the case, although it is people who ensure it persists, albeit unwittingly in most cases, to this very day. The globe Earth lie is ubiquitous, autonomous, and invisible to the people upon the world, yet it is truly the foundation of the modern paradigm. This brilliant lie is implanted and reinforced into the collective belief system culture-wide at such a young age that the lie psychologically appears to us as an obvious, self-evident truth, such as fire is hot, the sky is blue, stones are hard, water is wet, and the earth is a spinning ball. This complete disconnect between cultural belief and actual reality is so profound that even the most intelligent, secular, and skeptical people on the world carry this fallacy as the fundamental cornerstone of their belief system for their entire life. This deception is so powerful that although we will all experience the flat and motionless world our entire lives, we believe the motionless plane to be a spinning sphere, in spite of how absurd the concept truly is. Worse still, people will point to natural events that are completely antithetical or incompatible with the concept of a spinning ball Earth, and yet consider such events as proof of the world's rotational rotundity. For example, what goes up must come down is something you would simply never expect as a physical law upon a spinning ball Earth, yet famous so-called scientists like Neil deGrasse or Bill Nye will drop their microphone onto the ground, claiming that this proves the globe and confirms the theory of gravity at once.
What is gravity?
You have no idea. Okay, next question.
What is gravity?
You have no idea. Okay, next question.
What is gravity?
You have no idea. You have no idea. Okay, next question.
This is called gravity. That's what I do. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, bitch. That's what I do. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, bitch. That's what I do. I'm Neil deGrasse Tyson, bitch.
What is gravity?
You have no idea. Okay, next question.
This is called gravity.
We can describe gravity. We can say what it does to other things.
This is called gravity.
Such a level of irony and brazen ignorance and arrogance are equaled only by the hilarity of such a devout globism, although it's difficult not to shudder at the realization that ignorance and blind belief are truly running the show when it comes to theoretical science, not to mention the basis for the larger cultural paradigm. This complete and utter deception, which distorts reality as we are children, barely learning about the world around us, clearly exists. So this deception certainly exists whether we know it or like it or not. This means there must be some motive to be found in the annals of anti-science history, for such a deception couldn't possibly come about spontaneously or by natural progression or honest scientific inquiry. The world has been flat and motionless for all of time. For the majority of human history, everyone naturally knew and understood this obvious and fundamental property of nature. While theories of the globe Earth may have existed 2,000 years ago as claimed by historians, such things certainly weren't widely believed, accepted, or even acknowledged by the world until relatively recently in history. This is evidenced by the fact that the first known globe Earth model was made in 1492, the same year, incidentally, that the American continents were quote-unquote discovered by Cristobal Colon. So it seems there is some correlation here, but it also seems there was a push towards creating a belief in the globe Earth, as it was claimed that Columbus finding the east coast of India, which later turned out to be the Bahamas in reality, and the subsequent voyages of Magellan and the like showed circumnavigation, and they extrapolated that circumnavigation is somehow exclusive to a globular Earth, therefore the Earth must be a globe. This is all, of course, nonsense and non sequitur, as circumnavigation is perfectly achievable upon a planar Earth and is certainly not exclusive to a globe. But history proves that the globe Earth theory wasn't widely accepted in Europe during even the 1600s, as Galileo was put on trial by the Church for claiming the Earth was a globe that revolved around the sun. With this information in mind, any arguments from the globe Earthers claiming we've always known the Earth was round doesn't really hold water, at least any earlier than the 1600s, around the time of Galileo. I mean, why would he be, imprisoned or put on trial for claiming a spinning ball Earth going around the sun in the 1600s if it was widely accepted that we lived on a globe in the 1500s? It shouldn't have come as any sort of surprise to those who put Galileo on trial. That is, of course, according to the globe Earth proponents who say that everyone knew the Earth was a globe for 2,000 years. While we can really only speculate on what percentage of the population believed the Earth was a globe over the centuries following the colonization of the Americas, it is clear that during the last 150 years, the campaign to solidify the globe Earth theory as scientific gospel has been going very strong. During this time frame, practical technologies have advanced very far, very fast, providing the perfect cover for its dubious cousin, anti-science or theoretical scientism. Practical physical science is responsible for extraordinary achievements, undoubtedly, while theoretical science has done nothing of value for humankind ever, well, sans filling young minds with fiction and calling it scientific fact. In 1865, the groundbreaking book Zetetic Astronomy, written by Dr. Robotham, really does a good job of shattering all of the foundational arguments and assumptions of the globe Earth theory, and confirms that the globe Earth theory was being preached as gospel in the classrooms of Robotham's era. So we know that the globe Earth has been pushed to youngsters at least as far back as the early 1800s. Anyone who read the book Zetetic or attended Robotham's lectures would have certainly been impressed by the data and the facts presented, or at the very least they would have found a renewed interest in our place in the universe. The Zetetic movement of the 1800s, if you will, probably caused quite a stir with contemporary dogmatic pontificants of lions. So, we would have expected to see smear campaigns and character assassination towards Robotham, which indeed we did see, and the books that he wrote, his lectures, his work, were essentially buried in history. They certainly don't teach about him in school, and of course there's good reason for that. So about 40 years later, after Zetetic was written, the story of the Iron Republic was published in Florida Magazine, and I've actually got that in audiobook format on my channel. I'll put a card to that right here. But the story of the Iron Republic was published in, I think, 1902, and it was about a voyage that happened in the very late 1800s, wherein a civilization yet unknown to the world was reported to exist beyond the vast icy wastelands of the Antarctic. While the Iron Republic is a fascinating story indeed, whether you believe it or not, the advancements in technology during the 20th century certainly don't hurt the credibility of the story. Many technologies described in the Iron Republic didn't actually exist at the turn of the century, yet we would soon come to possess similar technologies in the following years. Is it possible that the technologies described in the story of the Iron Republic were a catalyst or even an origin to the technological revolution achieved during the 20th century in our realm? From the standpoint of the elitist powers of our realm, whether or not there is actually a cousin civilization thriving just outside the known boundaries of our realm is irrelevant, for if such an idea became too popular, people all over the world would attempt to voyage beyond the southern regions in search of new realms to explore or new civilizations to meet. Now, should the world governments learn of something like the Iron Republic, they would go, I believe, to great lengths to hide the fact, but I would also suspect they would be pragmatic enough to establish trade and communications with such a civilization, but they would never want the public to have the slightest clue about such a thing. Now, this would be an excellent reason to fool people of the world into believing in a finite globe, but it would also force world governments to covertly explore the Antarctic to see for themselves exactly what lies beyond the southern extremities of our realm. Apparently, that's exactly what happened, as the Russians and the Germans were very interested in the far south during the early 1900s. And of course, the United States government expressed great interest in the Antarctic, culminating in the massive naval mission dubbed Operation High Jump, led by U.S. Admiral Richard Byrd in the 1940s. Indeed, Byrd reported that a landmass larger than the United States lied south of the Little America slice of Antarctica, which doesn't really fit well on a globe Earth, to say the least. After surveying the Antarctic, Admiral Byrd claimed it was rich in all sorts of valuable resources and believed that the world would soon look to the virgin Antarctic for everything from coal to gold and everything in between. Unfortunately, it was precisely the opposite that happened since the 1940s and Operation High Jump, and the Antarctic has been left untouched, at least officially, but it's a matter of speculation as to whether or not there are actually large government-sponsored organizations down there in the Antarctic. In any case, the world has seen countless crises and disasters for the sake of raw materials and energy, not to mention the destruction of our landscapes by strip mining entire mountain ranges or fracking for gas, which is extremely detrimental to the surrounding environment. And let's not forget the oil spills and pipe bursts, which decimate local ecosystems in the ocean. Just all sorts of problems with mining for energy in our own backyards. Yet the Antarctic remains allegedly completely untapped. Now, from a pragmatic standpoint, or from a greedy corporate capitalist standpoint, it makes no sense whatsoever for the world governments, especially, say, the US, for example, to completely ignore the Antarctic in terms of energy sources or raw materials, as there are no people or even wildlife, for crying out loud, who would be there to protest the mining of their lands. Yet we choose to decimate our own lands and oceans and invade sovereign countries to steal their resources, either through military force or with insidious predatory central banking and loan scams. You know, something along the lines of the Diary of an Economic Hitman, financial assassination of a country. All of these underhanded, evil, risky steps are taken for the sake of energy and resources, while the Antarctic sits there untouched and untapped for decades and decades and decades since the Antarctic Treaty. Were the world indeed a finite sphere, the last untapped continent in the world, the Antarctic, should be buzzing with activity and home to millions of people working for corporations dedicated to extracting the limitless resources to be unearthed on the bottom of the ball. Of course, we have the Antarctic Treaty signed by many nations, including all nations which have a so-called space program, coincidentally, of course, and this treaty prevents people, corporations, and militaries from entering the Antarctic for anything other than peaceful scientific purposes. Now, it is a little bit more difficult than you might imagine to get permission to, go travel to the Antarctic, but that's a whole nother video. But all of this is rather ironic, for the scope of latitude allowed to anyone visiting the Antarctic in the name of science is limited to a single isolated destination. There is no infrastructure, railways, roads, bridges, nothing allowing for travel between South Polar destinations, making any large-scale surveying or exploration of the Antarctic quite impossible. Of course, the paramount impedance to broader pioneering in the Antarctic isn't the lack of physical infrastructure, rather an impenetrable psychological barrier, which leaves any explorer convinced that venturing beyond their southern outpost is futile and pointless. This makes roads, tunnels, and bridges in the Antarctic unnecessary, and the scientists down there remain content to ignore what frontier possibly lies beyond their southern horizon. So what happened between the time of Rowbotham's Zetetic movement in the late 1800s and the reports of the Iron Republic in the early 1900s? There must have been a small portion, some number of the population who became aware of the flat Earth reality during the time frame of Zetetic and the stories of the Iron Republic. So this may have been a rather large number of people. Now, if nothing was done to counter the flat Earth movement of the early 1900s, sooner or later people would begin to plan expeditions to the far south to see for themselves whether such things as the Iron Republic could be true. The powerful governments of the world would do whatever it takes to ensure the masses continue believing in a finite, inescapable, spherical world. Of course, we see Albert Einstein hit the scene in the early 1900s, who played a key, critical role in saving the Copernican universe theory and doing away with the flat Earth movement altogether. Now, Einstein singularly, uniquely, was granted rock star status by the powers that be, and obviously so. How many old scientists become superstars in their time? Can anyone think of a scientist more famous than Einstein, even decades after his death? Nikola Tesla was arguably the most important man in all of science history, and the elite controllers practically buried him in history, to the point where most people have never even heard of him. The aggrandizement of Einstein is certainly not normal, nor is it warranted, nor did it come about by natural means. Einstein invented nothing of practical value, and his anti-science theories of relativity and space-time have done absolutely nothing for humanity except solidify the false narrative pushed by the globetards. It seems fairly obvious to me as to why they would promote Einstein so heavily at the time that they did. If the powers that be decided to promote a person like Rowbotham as they did Einstein, the world would be a completely different place, for the better, I'm sure. Unfortunately, we're stuck in a reality where every kilowatt hour of electricity we use costs us money, and NASA spends $52 million every day faking space in order to maintain the deception. It appears the world governments have directed a long series of deceptions under the guise of practical applied science and engineering for the sole purpose of marrying theoretical anti-science with actual scientific technology. In other words, if they could use spacecraft to, say, land on the moon, it would prove that advanced scientific technology has confirmed theoretical astrophysics. Since practical science can't possibly be wrong, then theoretical science must not be wrong either. By this logic, going to the moon not only proved the Earth was a globe once and for all, but it also allowed for NASA and the like to be granted unlimited funding forever. It would appear that sometime in the early 1900s, a covert element of the US government became aware of the static plane Earth, or if they were already aware of it, they might have gotten a bit nervous about the possibility of this fact going public. Considering subsequent social repercussions, they began a decades-long psychological campaign to condition the masses into believing we were on the brink of space travel. During this time frame, an onslaught of space-age propaganda was disseminated across the radio and televisions of the public, in order to psychologically prime the masses for human space travel. So you had like War of the Worlds radio hoax in 1938. You had the Roswell, New Mexico UFO crash reported in the papers in 1947. The film Destination Moon in 1950. You had the Russian Sputnik scare in 1957. Then, of course, the TV series Lost in Space starting in 1965. And Star Trek in 1966. These are just to name a few movies, shows, fake news, and false flag events that were all part of this psychological operation to prime people into believing in space travel. So by the time it came for the Apollo missions, NASA really didn't need to do much in order to trick the masses, as the television and radio media had been using predictive programming techniques for decades across all possible forms of media, from movies to fake news. By the time Buzz and Neil were ready to launch, NASA merely had to go through the motions of pretending a moon landing, air it on all televisions they could across the world, and the deception was made concrete in the minds of most people of the world instantaneously. While there were apparently some people who were skeptical or didn't believe in the moon landings, the vast majority of the world was completely convinced it was true. Thanks to, of course, mass mind control devices all over the world in the form of television sets. This whole thing was quite insidious, as we all know that practical technologies are born by science, therefore science can never be wrong. Since practical science was used to confirm theoretical science, then such theory must also be immune to error, certainly not capable of deliberate deception. We all know science cannot tell a lie. The Apollo hoaxes did serve their purposes well, as the globe Earth theory was now beyond reproach, and anyone who dare question the heliocentric theory would be branded as an anti-scientific heretic. Any evidence or experiment contrary to the globe Earth theory is ridiculed and rejected, because considering the technological space program a giant scam is simply unthinkable. From the perspective of a normal person on planet Earth, there couldn't possibly be any motive for NASA or the government to lie about space, and even if anyone suspected them of lying, never in their wildest dreams would they conclude it was because the Earth is not a spinning ball. This would hold true even if someone told them the Earth wasn't a spinning ball, because such a concept is psychologically impossible for a person to even consider without a great deal of introspection and re-examination of the world around them, along with everything they've ever been taught about the natural universe being re-examined. The ball Earth theory is ingrained so deeply in our subconscious, it literally takes an act of God to cure this deception. Even then, it's up to each individual to put forth a great deal of effort to fully realize the truth and deprogram themselves from the lie. Knowing full well, without any doubt, that the Earth is not a spinning ball does not obligate us to provide answers to all questions pertaining to motive, or the natural world, or the unknown realms beyond, or the celestial lights. For example, theoretical anti-science claims they know the size, distance, temperature, and weight of a given star. Now, these values are derived by nothing more than a foundation of conjecture and a litany of theoretical premises which could never physically be confirmed or falsified by any practical means, yet such values are presented as unquestionable, immutable facts. Now, whether or not such a value to the size and distance and weight of a star is even remotely correct, it is a testament to the delusion of infallibility of the religion of scientism. The proponents for a motionless planar Earth do not profess to know the size, distance, or weight of a said star, and will admit such things to be unknowable. Now, this is used by the cult of scientism as ammunition against flat earthers, as they don't have answers to such questions which anti-science has mathematically perfect answers. So, while it appears that flat earthers are ignorant and anti-scientific, we are in fact anti-scientism, or anti-science, to use a double negative. Flat earthers are certainly in line with practical applied physical science, which enhance civilization with everything from airplanes to automobiles and computers. So we flat earthers love us some practical applied science. Flat earthers are a beacon of hope for the future of humankind and a testament to the power of truth over lies and light over dark. Although we are labeled a naive group of uneducated throwbacks from the 15th century and a nemesis to science, we are indeed the last chance that the future of humanity has against the overwhelmingly popular religion of theoretical anti-science, which clearly outweighs all other religions combined. This is because all people of all religions are more than likely, some percentage, believers in a spinning ball Earth. Plus, you have all the atheists, who are probably 100% globe believers, if not something very close to that. Only faith in a globe Earth allows people to believe in a world lost in an infinite universe of nothingness, created by chance, chaos, and the mysterious Big Bang Theory, where nothing exploded and slowly became the entire universe, coalescing into planets and stars and etc. over billions of years. The faith required to believe in such a completely ridiculous series of concepts relies solely on the conditioning we all undergo at a young age to accept the absurd concept of a spinning ball Earth. Such an insidious plot was around long before the global scarcity concept used by corporations or Wall Street sharks was in play, so we can rule that out as a motive to turn errors into lies taught in every school. This shift also predates the real need to prevent people from exploring beyond the far southern areas. And besides, such people would have been flat earthers who believed you would fall off the edge of the earth, or at least smack into the side of a dome holding us into the world. In fact, whomever decided to preach the ball earth theory as gospel to all generations of children may not have had insidious intentions at all, as they might have been completely convinced of the globe earth concept. The globe earth theory may not have been preached by nefarious deceivers at all, but by totally innocent, if not ignorant, believers of errors and fallacious assumptions supported by mathematics. In a hypothetical matrix such as a globe earth, you can create detailed mathematics around natural observations with the presupposition that the earth is a spinning globe. As long as your observations are accurate and your math is sound, then the mathematical results do not prove the primary hypothesis that the Earth is a spinning globe. It only proves that your observations were accurate and the math was done correctly, although it does not prove the underlying primary assumption of a spherical Earth. For example, Eratosthenes allegedly proved the circumference of the spherical Earth by observing the sun during the equinox and triangulating its position from two different locations using the shadow angles of sticks in the ground. Now, he assumed that the Earth was a sphere of some size, and that the sun was some great, practically infinite distance away. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with the experiment done by Eratosthenes, but the end result was very close to what theoretical anti-science purports in terms of the circumference of the Earth. The point is, you can take the same experimental data in terms of the shadow angles of the sun on the equinox at those two locations, and assume a planar Earth with a local sun, and get two completely different results in terms of what the shadow angles represent. So this shows we cannot begin an experiment with a false assumption as the basis and expect to get accurate data at the end of the experiment. Of course, neither set of results of this experiment could be accurate, as refraction wasn't taken into account by either, rendering incorrect results in both cases. Now, the amount of refraction occurring between the sun and an observer on the ground is quite intense, and we can't properly triangulate on the sun when the sun could not possibly be where it appears to be, due to refraction. In any case, the mathematics used to extrapolate the results of Eratosthenes' experiment are technically correct if you first assume the Earth is a sphere. However, the same experimental data will yield mathematically correct results should you assume the Earth to be a plane. Of course, the numbers will be drastically different. They would technically be mathematically correct. All of the so-called experiments which allegedly prove the globe-Earth theory exclusively begin with the assumption that the world must be a ball, and every calculation and value thereafter is based upon this primary premise. Any results could not possibly be correct, which means mathematics don't prove reality, they merely describe observable nature confined to the boundaries of a given hypothetical matrix. Whether this hypothetical matrix is imagined or actual is irrelevant to the resulting values, so long as the math checks out. Of course, the resulting values do not prove the underlying foundational assumption, but merely verify the mathematics were accurate within the boundaries of the given hypothesis. Other such experiments or proofs of a ball Earth are like the Foucault pendulum, ships over the horizon, Cavendish's gravitational constant, the Coriolis effect, eclipses, and so on and so forth. These all fall under the exact same banner as the experiment described with Eratosthenes. And this banner reads, of course, ball Earth or die. Every so-called evidence in support of a globe Earth is flimsy, circumstantial evidence which uniformly require the preconceived law that the world must be a spinning ball in the first place. All such evidence relies upon an unshakable belief in unproven assumptions. These assumptions are key to the entire deception, thus must be etched into the minds of all people as young as possible. But when exactly did this begin, the brainwashing of all generations of children? To this very day, the system of deception runs ubiquitously, silently, and seems to have no end in sight. Billions are spent annually to maintain the deception, and anyone speaking the truth about Flat Earth is ridiculed by the very people we're trying to help. This clearly is the result of a long-term psychological operation beginning at least as early as the early 1900s. At that point, it must have been clear to the higher levels of the world powers that we're not stuck on a finite ball in space. This fact is a major threat to any government, as they fear losing populations to mass exodus. And let's not forget, infallible science must save face at any cost, even if it means outright lying, whether they realize it or not. Myself included, people throughout history have disseminated the totally false globe earth religion with the best intentions at heart and without any knowledge of the deception. There are others who perpetuate the lie for self-preservation or under orders of their superiors, such as internet shills or our beloved astroliars. But an honest, intelligent, scientific mind, when confronted with flat Earth, will certainly come to the conclusion that the ball Earth theory warrants at least a skeptical revisit, or maybe even admit the idea of a motionless plain Earth has enough supporting evidence to warrant further investigation. What is science if not investigating nature and testing hypotheses? On the other hand, those who are lying to themselves for the sake of self-preservation, or even lucrative industries built around the dogmas of anti-science, are incapable of seeing reality properly, for it would prove their entire paradigm and self-identification are founded upon an absurd deception which is simply incompatible with their ID, career, and worldview. They would lose all credibility in terms of their past work, as well as their reputation with the infallible anti-scientific community of dogmatic zealots that rule the cult of scientism. As a vocal static planer, one of the things I hate to hear most is, what difference does it make whether the world is flat or spherical? How would this trite detail affect my life? Why should I care about the shape of the Earth, and why would anyone lie about it? Especially NASA, the government, or our teachers, for crying out loud. What credentials do you have to dare question the highly decorated, omnipotent pillars of science? In truth, the shape of the Earth isn't inherently a good or a bad thing. In many senses, history would have played out in near identical fashion whether the world was a spinning ball or a static plane. Equally as inconsequential in many senses would be human understanding about either. In other words, history would have probably played out the same upon a spherical or planar Earth, regardless of people's understanding of this, regardless of whether they were correct in their understandings. That is, of course, until fairly recent history. So for the past, say, 150 years, it became a dogged motive for many deep-pocketed interests to perpetuate and enhance, solidify and brainwash the great global deception into the budding minds of all generations of children. The Wall Street motive is, of course, to perpetuate the idea of scarcity of non-renewable resources. This allows greedy, secretive corporations to maximize profits by lying about the scarcity of a resource. One glaring example would be crude oil or fossil fuels, which are not made out of fossils, but these are said to be running dry. Like, say, back in the 1980s, there was a big oil crisis. Yet these once empty oil wells have miraculously begun to replenish themselves. Now, if scarcity is the ace in the hole for oil companies, then the Big Bang is the ace in the hole for atheists, and a finite world is a royal flush for world governments trying to keep their citizens confined within their realm of power. Now, these are all good, practical motives to perpetuate the deception, indeed. However, they seem to be secondary perks to the actual conspirator's motive. It is common knowledge to those of us in the know that the governments of the world are run by a small group of psychopathic, power-hungry elitists who consider most people as a lesser peasant class and adhere to anti-human, anti-Christian principles. Now, it can be argued that the upper echelons of world governments consist of super rich, anti-human plutocrats lacking allegiance and honor to their people, their nation, and God the Creator. By deceiving the entire world to believe in a spinning ball Earth, they cleverly sabotaged the Christian Bible, which places the Earth as the center of the known universe, created by God Himself as described in Genesis. Now, growing up in an Orthodox Christian household personally, acting as an altar boy for several years, I personally had major doubts about the validity of Christianity, as the widespread, ubiquitous, and omnipotent religion of scientism clashes head-on with the creation account found in Genesis, for one. As a young Christian, I subconsciously decided to absorb the life lessons found in the Bible with a grain of salt, as science was focused around an objective search for truth, while religion was merely a philosophical narrative penned by men who believed the world was flat and motionless, created in 7 days by nothing more than the words spoken by God. Now, modern scientism has done an excellent job of creating doubt in the existence of an intelligent creator, regardless of which religion a student happens to be. For example, the Quran states that the sun and moon are both ceaseless in motion. The sun and moon run for a fixed term. The day hastens after the night. The earth is fixed, no concept of a turning ball. The earth is flat and spread out like a carpet, while the sky is a physical structure, and that God holds up the sky. So again, these are Muslim beliefs found in the Quran. So, in other words, it's not just Christians who believe in a flat earth. Going back further, Tibetan and Buddhist cosmology contain a motionless planar earth. So the relentless endeavors of theoretical anti-science is not just aimed at Judeo-Christian credibility, but appears to target the reputations of many major religions. Now, it's worth mentioning that Christian, Muslim, and Tibetan holy books were not created with any intention of proving the shape or nature of the world, as, again, it was common knowledge that the earth is a static plane. Thus, there would be no need to even mention the concept of a spinning ball Earth or not spinning ball Earth. If the religion of theoretical scientism can cast doubt on the credibility of all religions, it will quickly gain followers from all religious groups, united under the banner, "The wisest of men are fools in the eyes of God." Over a few short generations, scientism has amassed an army of self-righteous fools who believe themselves to be wise, practical, skeptical, secular atheists. Yet these atheists are, of course, the majority bottom level of the most popular religion ever known, which has indeed united all religions under a single banner of heliocentrism, or maybe sun worship. Now, at the start of the 20th century, or in the early 1900s, I believe there was a massive concerted push by the satanic, anti-human shadow elements of world government to clench control over the world by subconsciously removing people's faith in a divine creator and instilling faith in chaos and chance. Their control must be held by more subtle and less violent means than standard methods like whippings, hangings, or torture. So they cunningly decided to use a softer approach which destroys faith and spirituality and reduces sovereign human beings and family units down to a biological coincidence who evolved over time from a gooey pile of inanimate primordial ooze into fishes, into monkeys, into people. By such standards, there couldn't possibly be a god or some supernatural intelligent creator. The world and the life that it hosts are merely the result of chaotic chance, chemical reactions, and a long enough time period to allow for a volatile, volcanic, violent world to miraculously disobey the laws of entropy and create life out of this hypothetical primordial soup. One of the most important elements of a successful, productive society is a population who has faith in a higher power and treat others as they would like to be treated. Even if such a population has never heard of Christ or his golden rule, such behavior will always result in a loving, productive, and content society. A culture run by people with solid moral integrity, generosity to others, who recognize and respect the sacred sovereignty of each individual, could only be theoretically possible if the government's or the leader's faith lied with God as opposed to with greed, violence, and the oppression of their people. When you systematically remove the values which form the fabric of a successful culture through abandoning the ideals shared and taught by all religions, subsequent generations will deteriorate and suffer in terms of compassion for one another, and will worship idols who are promoted by the insidious mass media outlets. The best possible way for a group conspiring to destroy the spiritual fabric of a civilization is to create a generation of people who worship the television, which is the most effective mass mind control device ever known. Also, this generation would worship themselves in vanity, viewing lower class people with complete apathy or contempt. The modern devout atheist views success as having more money in their account or toys in the garage than the next guy. And this applies to everyone from televangelists to politicians. Money is indeed the modern measure of success in most people's eyes. Decent people are subconsciously, psychologically programmed by the hypnotic television and the educational indoctrination systems for the first quarter of their life, and ceaseless television propaganda is focused on increasingly younger audiences, enhancing their goals, techniques, effectiveness, and operational scope as the years progress. As we are programmed to conform to the religion of anti-science or scientism, society slowly abandons the core values which hold families, communities, and nations together. Our collective programming reinforces the underlying tenets of scientism, promoting spiritual and cultural disharmony to an astonishing degree and with the speed of a wildfire. Respect for human life dwindles, trampled upon by various facets of the institutional and corporate control structures of the world system-wide. Americans believe our God-given human rights are defined and protected by the words found in the Constitution, or the Bill of Rights, or the Declaration of Independence, yet these ancient documents may have been a devious plan to bring the young American colonies back into the royal fold from which they had crossed seas to escape. So perhaps the new American citizens were officially subjects of England, although none the wiser for it. The authors of the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, and the Bill of Rights were predominantly Freemasons who were ostensibly allied to the European royalty. And let's not forget, there were 7 presidents prior to George Washington. These presidents were under the Articles of Confederation in the Continental Congress. And so it appears that George Washington was the first Freemasonic shill president loyal to the crown. but that is just a bit of speculation. However, these documents, like the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, create the framework for a culture run by secular atheists who happen to be dogmatic zealots in the religion of scientism, or at least the practice of anti-science. Over time, in the recent decades, the honor, dignity, and respectability of people in general has dwindled, arguably due to the abandonment of the core values which have historically been preserved by the religions of the world. Love them or hate them. This isn't to say that if a Buddhist man decides to become an atheist one day, he would suddenly shapeshift into some evil, demon-possessed psycho. The point is, when a person or a family or a town or a nation is incrementally separated from their morality, faith, spirituality, and compassion for others, their cultural structure will naturally crumble away. A few generations later, we'll certainly find a culture that is rampant with crime and an unmanageable prison system, and politicians will incessantly lie to further their plans of invading or bombing some country on our national shit list. So when a person says, what difference does it make whether the earth is flat or a globe, perhaps we could tell them, well, what's the difference between the honest truth and a devious lie? It is frankly impossible to know what the world would be like were we not all deceived at a very young age about the spinning ball nonsense. However, it is my firm belief that if we start all of our experimentation and philosophy on a foundation that is totally false and incorrect, then our conclusions, or any conclusions drawn with that as a starting point, couldn't possibly be anything close to correct. And so, while the physical shape of the world may not affect one's life directly or like immediately, there are countless unimaginable consequences to this entire culture founded on deception. And the only antidote to this deception is obviously the truth. And what's unfortunate is that most people, would never believe the truth in a million years, and many of them don't think that it's important enough to really dig into, to verify or to falsify. But I think a safe answer to the question is that we at least deserve a chance to know what the world may be like if everyone grew up understanding our true place in the natural universe, which is not an insignificant, random, chaotic place, but is indeed a central, special, unique place that appears to have been created for us to take care of, and in turn the world sort of takes care of us. One hand washes the other. And over the last several generations, the last 150 years especially, humankind has done an excellent job of destroying and poisoning the earth for ends that are, well, on the surface they seem logical, such as fuel and coal and rare minerals and rare stones. Those may seem like good reasons to destroy the earth. However, when it comes back to the question of the Antarctic, we certainly, as good capitalists, should at least consider going down to the Antarctic to begin tapping its resources in order to avoid destroying and polluting our very own local ecosystems. So With that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up this video. I appreciate all y'all taking the time to watch and listen. I hope you enjoyed it. As I mentioned earlier, we've hit some kind of tough times this month, so any support that you can help out with would be greatly appreciated. And again, I would like to give a big shout out and thanks to all of you that supported through PayPal, as well as all you Patreon supporters out there. Your help really goes a long way and means the world to me. So thank you very much. And again, if anyone out there would like to support the channel efforts, you can do so very easily with a one-time contribution through PayPal to www.paypal.me/themorguile. And you can also become a patron for as little as $1 per month at www.patreon.com/themorguile. So thanks so much. God bless you all. And as always, spread the word, spread the world, and peace.